He opened his mailbox and found his own obituary inside. It specified the exact date and time of death, tomorrow, 11:47 p.m. I trudged up the front steps of my brownstone, exhaustion weighing on my shoulders after another 14-hour day at the precinct. The Anderson case had consumed the last 3 weeks of my life, a suspected homicide with no body and a trail of evidence that led nowhere. Captain Reynolds had finally ordered me to go home and get some sleep. Even obsessed detectives need rest, Mercer, he'd said, practically shoving me out the door. The October wind bit through my jacket as I fished for my keys. Force of habit made me check my mailbox first. Bills could wait until morning, but case-related correspondence couldn't. I twisted the small key and pulled down the metal door. Amid the usual suspects, a phone bill, a credit card offer, and a takeout menu from the new Thai place down the street, was a folded newspaper page. I frowned, extracting it from between the envelopes. Who still clips newspaper articles these days? Under the yellowish glow of the entryway light, I unfolded the paper. My fingers went numb almost instantly, and not from the autumn chill. My own face stared back at me from the page. Not a candid shot or something pulled from social media, but my official department photo, the one hanging in the precinct lobby. Beneath it, in the crisp, formal typeface of the Boston Herald. Today we mourn the loss of Detective James Mercer, age 38, of the Boston Police Department. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read the date, tomorrow, 11:47 p.m. This had to be a sick joke. Someone with a twisted sense of humor and a decent knowledge of layout software. Probably Keller from Cyber Crimes. He'd been threatening to get me back for that April Fool's prank for months. But as I studied the clipping, unease crawled up my spine. The paper stock felt right. The printing quality was professional. Even the fold marks and slight yellowing at the edges seemed authentic, as if it had been pulled from tomorrow's actual newspaper. I unlocked my apartment door, flipping on lights as I entered. Living alone meant darkness until I dictated otherwise. I tossed my keys onto the counter, but kept the obituary clutched in my hand as I made a beeline for my laptop. The Herald's website loaded quickly. I typed my name into the search bar and waited, holding my breath. No results found. Relief washed over me, followed immediately by renewed suspicion. I pulled out my phone and called my partner, Rachel Diaz. Mercer. It's almost midnight. Please tell me you're not still at the office, she answered, her voice thick with sleep. No, I'm home. Listen, did anyone at the precinct mention a prank they were planning? Something involving the newspaper. What? No. What are you talking about? I hesitated, suddenly feeling foolish. Someone left a fake obituary in my mailbox. With my photo. It's dated for tomorrow. The line went silent for a moment. That's messed up, Rachel finally said. But honestly, with the Anderson case? You've been pushing a lot of buttons lately. Could be anyone from that neighborhood association to Anderson's business partners. Yeah, probably, I agreed, not entirely convinced. Sorry to wake you. Wait, she said before I could hang up. What exactly does it say? I read her the text. That's weird, she said slowly. What do you mean? Nothing, it's just, the wording sounds familiar somehow. Probably just standard obituary stuff. Look, do you want me to come over? At midnight? No, I'm fine. Just tired and paranoid. Go back to sleep. Call me if you need anything. And Mercer? Maybe check your carbon monoxide detector, just in case. I smiled despite myself. Thanks, Diaz. After we hung up, I walked to the kitchen and pinned the obituary to my refrigerator with a magnet. Maybe in the morning light, it would reveal something I was missing now. I took a shower, made a sandwich, and tried to distract myself with mindless television. But my eyes kept drifting to the kitchen, to that piece of paper with its impossible date. At 1:30 a.m., restless and frustrated, I grabbed my coat. The 24-hour convenience store 3 blocks over would have today's, or rather, yesterday's, Herald. And tomorrow's early edition would hit the stands by 4 a.m. I needed to see the real paper, compare the fonts, the layout, everything. The streets were nearly empty. A couple of taxis cruised by, their roof lights illuminated. Music thumped from a bar down the street where night owls were getting in their last drinks before closing time. The convenience store's fluorescent lighting spilled out onto the sidewalk, a beacon in the darkness. The bell jingled as I pushed open the door. The clerk, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and glasses, barely looked up from his paperback. "Do you have yesterday's Herald?" I asked. He pointed to a stack of newspapers in the corner. I grabbed one and quickly flipped to the obituary section, comparing it to the photo I'd taken of the clipping on my phone. The font matched. The layout matched. Even the column width was identical. "When do you get tomorrow's papers?" I asked the clerk. He glanced at his watch. "Early edition arrives around 3:30. I bought a coffee and took a seat by the window, settling in to wait. The clerk gave me an odd look but didn't comment. I must have looked like a madman, clutching yesterday's paper and staring intently at my phone. At 3:42 a.m., a delivery van pulled up outside. The driver unloaded several bundles of newspapers, bringing one into the store. I was on my feet before he'd even finished. "Just came in," the clerk said unnecessarily as I grabbed a copy and flipped frantically through the pages. There was no obituary for Detective James Mercer in the early edition of tomorrow's Boston Herald. Relief made my knees weak. It was a hoax, just as I'd thought. An elaborate, unsettling hoax, but a hoax nonetheless. I paid for the paper and headed home, fatigue finally catching up with me. I would file a report in the morning. Threats against police officers, even veiled ones, were taken seriously. Back in my apartment, I locked the door and did a quick sweep, a habit from my years on the force. Everything was as I'd left it. The obituary still hung on the refrigerator, seeming less ominous now that I'd confirmed its fraudulent nature. I collapsed into bed without bothering to undress, setting an alarm for 8 a.m. As I drifted toward sleep, one thought nagged at me: who would go to such lengths to make me believe I was going to die tomorrow night? The next morning, I called in and explained the situation to Captain Reynolds. He was concerned but not overly alarmed. "Probably related to the Anderson case," he said. "Someone's trying to rattle you. I'll have uniforms do extra patrols by your place tonight, but maybe take the day off. You're overdue for some comp time anyway." I wanted to argue, but the sleepless night had left me drained. "Fine. I'll be back tomorrow." "Not if that obituary is right, you won't," Reynolds joked, then immediately apologized. "Sorry, bad taste. Just get some rest, Mercer." After hanging up, I made coffee and spread the fake obituary on my kitchen table. In the daylight, certain details jumped out that I'd missed before. The text mentioned my tireless dedication to the citizens of Boston and my unparalleled investigative skills, phrases that felt lifted from department commendation ceremonies. It named my parents, both deceased, and mentioned that I was survived by no immediate family, which was accurate but depressing to see in print. Most disturbing was the cause of death: Detective Mercer died of gunshot wounds sustained in the line of duty. Someone had put serious thought into this. Someone who knew me, or at least knew about me. I spent the morning making a list of potential suspects, perps I'd put away who had been released recently, witnesses I'd pressed too hard, even colleagues who might hold grudges. The list was depressingly long. By noon, paranoia had set in completely. I checked and rechecked the locks on my doors and windows. I cleaned my service weapon and kept it within reach. I drew the blinds and positioned myself where I could see the street without being seen. At 3 p.m., my phone rang. It was Marcus Chen, a crime reporter for the Herald and an occasional contact of mine. Mercer, I answered cautiously. Hey, detective. Heard you had a scare last night. My grip tightened on the phone. Who told you that? Reynolds mentioned you got some kind of threat. Wanted to make sure you weren't talking to the Globe instead of me if there's a story here. Typical Marcus, always chasing the next headline. It's nothing, just a prank. Someone left a fake obituary in my mailbox. There was a pause. An obituary? Yours? Yeah, dated for tonight. Whoever did it mocked up a Herald page. Pretty convincing actually. That's bizarre. Can I see it? Why? Looking to run a piece on pranks against police officers? No, it's just, we had something similar happen about a year ago. A councilman got his own obituary in the mail. 3 days later he died in a car accident. My blood turned to ice. You never reported on that? The family asked us not to. They thought it was a tasteless coincidence. But if it's happened again. I need everything you have on that case, I demanded. I'll have to dig through the archives. Give me a couple hours. After hanging up, I paced my apartment, mind racing. This was no longer just about me. If what Marcus said was true, there was a pattern. And patterns were what I lived for as a detective. At 5:30 p.m., Marcus texted me an address. No message, just a street number in Dorchester. I recognized it as a coffee shop we'd met at before when exchanging sensitive information. I debated whether to go. Leaving the apartment meant exposure, vulnerability. But staying meant ignorance, and ignorance could be just as deadly. I tucked my gun into its holster, pulled on a jacket, and headed out. The coffee shop was busy with the after-work crowd. Marcus sat in the far corner, a manila folder on the table in front of him. He looked nervous, fidgeting with his coffee cup as I approached. This is everything I could find, he said without preamble, pushing the folder toward me. The councilman's obituary, police reports, our unpublished notes on the story. I opened the folder. The first item was a newspaper clipping, eerily similar to the one in my mailbox. Same font, same layout, similarly formal language. Councilman Robert Walsh, 52, had allegedly died of a heart attack while jogging. 3 days after receiving this, Walsh's car was hit by a truck that ran a red light, Marcus explained. The driver was never found. Abandoned the truck a few blocks away. Was it ruled an accident? Officially, yes. But off the record? The detective in charge had his doubts. The truck had been reported stolen just an hour before the accident. The traffic camera at that intersection malfunctioned that day. Too many coincidences. I flipped through the police reports, noting the investigating officer's name, Detective Saul Greenberg, now retired. I'd worked with him briefly years ago, a thorough, meticulous investigator not given to flights of fancy. There's one more thing, Marcus said quietly. A week before Walsh died, he voted against a rezoning proposal that would have allowed development of a historic waterfront property. A lot of money was at stake. You think it's connected to the Anderson case? I asked. The property developer Richard Anderson had disappeared 3 weeks ago, leaving behind evidence of massive financial fraud and a number of angry investors. Marcus shrugged. I don't know. But Walsh wasn't the only one who got an obituary. He pulled out another clipping, this one older and more worn. Judge Michael Fenton, 2019. Received his obituary 2 days before he was found dead in his home. Apparent suicide, but again, there were inconsistencies in the investigation. What was Fenton working on? He was presiding over a RICO case against several members of the Costello crime family. After his death, the case was reassigned, and eventually most charges were dropped due to mishandled evidence. I sat back, mind working furiously. So we have a judge, a councilman, and now a detective, all receiving their own obituaries shortly before their actual deaths. All working on high-profile cases with powerful interests at stake. Marcus nodded grimly. The herald of death. That's what Greenberg called it. A warning that someone had decided your time was up. But who? These cases span years in different areas of the city. Maybe it's not one person. Maybe it's a service. Marcus leaned forward. You pay enough money, someone makes your problem disappear and sends a calling card first, just to be theatrical. It sounded far-fetched, but I'd learned long ago that reality often outpaced imagination when it came to crime. I need to talk to Greenberg, I said, gathering the papers. Already called him. He's expecting you. Marcus handed me a slip of paper with an address. And Mercer? Be careful. It's 6:30 already. 5 hours until my supposed death. I tried to ignore the chill that ran down my spine. Greenberg lived in a small house in Revere, a 20-minute drive from the coffee shop. I called Rachel from the car, updating her on what I'd learned. I'm coming with you, she said immediately. No, I need you to follow up on the Anderson angle. If his disappearance is connected to this somehow, we need to know. Mercer, someone is threatening to kill you tonight. You shouldn't be alone. I'm not alone. I'm meeting with Greenberg. Besides, if something happens to me, someone needs to know the whole story. She cursed fluently in Spanish, a sure sign she was truly worried. Fine. But check in every hour, or I'm sending SWAT to your location. Greenberg's house was modest but well maintained, with carefully trimmed hedges and a small American flag by the door. He answered on the first knock, as if he'd been waiting by the entrance. Mercer, he said gruffly, extending a hand. Wish it were under better circumstances. Me too, sir. He led me to a small study lined with bookshelves. A desk in the corner held a computer and several neat stacks of papers. The walls were decorated with commendations and family photos. Marcus filled me in, Greenberg said, gesturing for me to sit. You got the Herald. That's what you call it. The Herald? Seemed fitting. He settled into a worn leather chair with a sigh. When I was working the Walsh case, I thought it was just a sick coincidence at first. Then I heard about Fenton and started digging. Found 3 more cases going back 10 years. All people who got obituaries before they died. All people in positions of power who received their own obituaries shortly before dying in apparently accidental or natural ways. Greenberg pulled a folder from his desk drawer. I compiled everything, but when I tried to open an official investigation, I hit a wall. No one wanted to connect the dots. Said I was seeing patterns where there were none. I took the folder, scanning the contents. 5 cases, including Walsh and Fenton. A transit authority director who drowned in his pool 2 days after receiving his obituary. An assistant DA who died in a house fire. A health department official who suffered a fatal allergic reaction at a restaurant. All of these deaths were ruled accidental or natural causes. Greenberg nodded. Clean. Too clean. No evidence of foul play, no suspects, no witnesses. Perfect crimes. But who benefits? These cases don't seem connected. Follow the money, Mercer. Always follow the money. Greenberg turned to his computer, pulling up a complex diagram. I've been mapping this since I retired. Different victims, different circumstances, but always a financial angle. The transit director had just cancelled a major contract. The health official had shut down several restaurants owned by the same hospitality group. The assistant DA was prosecuting a hedge fund manager. I studied the diagram, mind racing. And now me, investigating Richard Anderson's disappearance and the millions he allegedly stole from investors. What exactly have you uncovered in that case? Greenberg asked. I hesitated, old habits of case confidentiality kicking in, then reminded myself that my life might depend on full disclosure. Anderson was supposedly developing luxury properties across the city, but most of the projects were shells. He was using new investor money to pay returns to earlier investors, classic Ponzi scheme. But when I started digging into his client list, I found some interesting names. Shell companies, offshore accounts, all leading back to the Devlin Group. Greenberg's eyebrows shot up. Marcus Devlin? The real estate mogul? The very same. His company had invested nearly $20 million with Anderson. But here's the strange part, they never filed a complaint when Anderson disappeared. Everyone else was banging down our door demanding action, but Devlin's people were conspicuously quiet. You think they already knew what happened to him? I think they might have been the ones who made him disappear. I checked my watch, 7:45 p.m. And now someone wants me to disappear too, with a very specific timeline. Greenberg leaned forward, his expression grave. You need to go somewhere safe, somewhere no one would expect you to be at 11:47 tonight. I have a better idea, I said, a plan forming in my mind. I need to be exactly where they expect me to be, but not alone. I called Rachel again, this time with specific instructions. Then I called Captain Reynolds and Marcus Chen. By 9:30 p.m., everything was in place. At 10:45 p.m., I returned to my apartment building. The street was quiet, just a few cars parked along the curb. I climbed the steps slowly, making myself visible through the glass door before entering. Inside my apartment, I made a show of moving around, silhouettes visible through the blinds as I turned lights on and off. At 11:30, I sat down in my living room chair, positioned to be visible as a shadow from the street. At 11:40, my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel, in position. Units on standby. At 11:45, I heard a noise in the hallway outside my apartment, a soft footfall, nearly imperceptible. At 11:46, my doorknob turned slowly, though I knew I'd locked it. At 11:47, the door burst open, and a figure dressed in black rushed in, gun raised. But I wasn't in the chair, only a carefully arranged pile of cushions. I was pressed against the wall beside the door, my own weapon drawn. Police! Drop your weapon! I shouted. The intruder spun toward me, and I caught a glimpse of cold eyes through the ski mask. The gun swung in my direction. A shot rang out, not from my gun or the intruders, but from the hallway, where Rachel had been waiting. The intruder crumpled to the floor, the bullet finding its mark in their shoulder. Within seconds, the apartment was swarming with officers. The intruder was disarmed, cuffed, and unmasked. I didn't recognize the face, a professional, most likely. Someone hired for a job. Who sent you? I demanded as the paramedics worked on his shoulder. He remained silent, eyes calculating, weighing options. We've connected you to at least 5 other deaths, I bluffed. The Herald of Death. That's what they call you. Judge Fenton, Councilman Walsh, we have evidence linking you to all of them. Something flickered in his eyes, not fear, but interest. Deal, he said simply. That's not how this works, Rachel snapped. You don't get to demand anything. You want the client list, I want immunity. His voice was calm, measured, as if we were discussing a business transaction rather than murder. Lot of important people use our services. Names that would make excellent headlines. Marcus Chen, who had been waiting with Captain Reynolds in a car outside, stepped forward with his recorder. I'd be very interested in those names. The intruder smiled thinly. I thought you might be. As they took him away, I returned to my living room, collapsing onto the couch. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me shaky and exhausted. Rachel sat beside me. You okay? Yeah. I picked up the obituary from the coffee table where I'd left it. Guess this was premature. She took it from me, studying it again. Still weird that the wording seemed familiar to me. Maybe you saw one of the others. Greenberg had files on at least 5 similar cases. No, it's something else. She trailed off, then snapped her fingers. Wait here. She rushed out to her car and returned moments later with a file folder. The Rodriguez case, 3 years ago. The one with the psychic who claimed he could predict deaths. What about it? The prediction he wrote for his 3rd victim, the language is nearly identical to parts of your obituary. I frowned, taking the file. She was right. Certain phrases, the formal structure, even some specific word choices matched. But that guy's been in prison for 2 years, I said. He couldn't have sent this. No, but someone with access to the case files could have copied his style. Someone who knew about the Herald tradition and wanted to make use of it. A chill ran down my spine. Someone inside the department. Rachel met my eyes. It would explain how they got your official photo. How they knew so many personal details. The implications were staggering. If the Herald Service had tentacles reaching into the police department itself, how many other cases had been influenced? How many investigations derailed? Captain Reynolds appeared in the doorway. Mercer, Diaz, our suspect is talking. Says he's part of something called the Obituary Service. High-end clients, completely anonymous, payments through cryptocurrency. He's just the trigger man, never knows who hires them. But he's willing to give up his handler. I asked. For the right deal, yes. Reynolds looked grim. Thing is, the names he's already dropped, they're big. Politicians, business leaders, even a judge on the federal bench. This goes deeper than we imagined. I thought of the obituary still clutched in my hand, of how close I'd come to becoming just another entry in Greenberg's file of mysterious deaths. The printed obituary is never the full story, I said quietly. It's what gets left unsaid that matters. Rachel nodded, understanding. We've got a lot of digging to do. Outside, the city continued its nighttime rhythm, unaware that a shadow network had just begun to crack. Somewhere, powerful people were about to discover that their herald of death had failed to deliver, and that their own reckonings might now be approaching, right on schedule. As for me, I had outlived my obituary. The question now was, what would I do with the life I'd reclaimed?